Hello and welcome to the DPC Show. My name is Dan Offen, aka Mr. Big Jams. In this show, I'm going to be taking you through all 6 of the DPC regions, aided by 6 of the world's top analysts who are keeping on track of all the players, teams, and events in each of the regions, so you don't have to. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, I can be found at Daniel Offen, and that's spelled Daniel and then O-F-F-E-N. And if you'd like to financially support me for creating this show, you can find a link to my Patreon in the episode description. We're going to be kicking things off pretty quickly with Danog in Southeast Asia, so let's head straight there. Okay, so just to kick off, talk me through, I suppose, what you see as the biggest series of the last week of the SEA DPC.
It has to be everything that was to do with Fnatic and T1, right? Because you have, Neon and T1, because you have Fnatic versus TNC, the El Clasico of the Southeast Asian region. Fnatic were able to secure that 1-2-1, which meant that, TNC's fate wasn't in their hands anymore. They had to rely on Neon beating T1 to leave TNC in that three-way tie along with Boom and a few others, just to make sure that they had any sort of chance of making their way through the wild card. Didn't end up happening. So it's going to be Fnatic going through the playoffs. Neon very happy to say that they're going through the group stage, and T1's making up the wild card there.
Great. It was a big week for the SEA DPC, and let's, I think, go first into those 2 Neon versus T1 series. They were 2-1 both ways, with T1 picking up the first win to put themselves into that tiebreaker. What ended up happening in that first series?
The first series, I think, was just a case of Neon perhaps getting a little bit too clever for themselves. I mean, Yopaj, they put him on an Alchemist, which again isn't really his style of hero. He needs to be very hyper-mobile. He needs to be moving around the map, making a lot of plays happen. Alchemist isn't really the one for that. You know, as much as I like to compare him to the Thompson style when you see him, he doesn't really fit that same mold, because, you know, when you think of when OG was playing Alchemist, they had a Darkseer paired together with him to really enable him to be that hyper carry that's able to just dominate the game from 20 plus minutes onwards. But he's all about just getting kills. It's not about objectives as much for him. They did actually some weird thing. I know I might be jumping ahead a little bit, but with the second series, the first series I thought Playhard played a little underwhelming. Like, he played Legion Commander in both of those losses, and, you know, I think he got 1 kill across both of those games, and about 20 plus deaths. So really underperforming. And in the second series, it was actually Skem, aka Debil, who kind of reprised his role as a core. Like, he took over the reins of being that position 3 again, and Playhard went back to being that position 4, and it ended up working out a lot better for him.
So in that final series, I think we can talk a little bit about that last match. That was the only one I caught, so that's why I'm diving straight in to talk about it. It felt very close to me. I know it was over in only 43 minutes, but there was a Terrorblade there that was causing a lot of havoc, and it felt generally like a pretty close game. Could have it gone either way? Do you think this is a coin flip of 2 teams to one make the major and one to not, or do you feel that Neon were comfortably ahead in that respect?
They were comfortably ahead in terms of kills and actually in net worth as well, but always when you're going up against a Terrorblade, you're worried about, you know, the late game potential of that. The thing is with Neon, even though they went this position 3 Wraith King, and he actually rushed Skem Radiance as his first item on an off-lane Wraith King, and he wasn't punished for it. So you had 3 genuine cores as the opposing lineup against this Terrorblade, so you could actually deal with it reasonably. It kind of contrasts with the Fnatic versus TNC series, where you had a Wraith King picked up in the offlane where KP was playing it in, I want to say, game 3, maybe it was game 2. Yeah, it was game 2, and the game still went on for 50 minutes, but they were playing up against a Lycan, and he picks this Wraith King offlane, or he gets given the offlane, and then he just goes a Midas, which against a Lycan, absolutely not what you want to do. You know, Lycan is all about making stuff happen super early on. Yes, you can itemize to try and take the game a little bit later and try and do something with it, but, you know, yes, you can Midas the wolves, and you can actually Midas the Necrobook Archer as well, but it's the warrior, the one that deals all of that burst damage, that's the one that you're really worrying about. So it just didn't feel like they had the equation TNC to be able to pull that one off.
I want to go a little bit more into kind of T1 as a final thought. I think for a lot of people, this will be a disappointment for T1 as one of the world's biggest esports organizations, struggling to make the major and indeed not making the major across this whole tournament, and I suppose especially in this last week, do you feel that the burden of that failure can be placed upon the players and the team, or is it a case that they just came across significantly better teams? What do they need to improve for season 2 to get into the major?
Well, the T1 did make it. They're in the wild card of the major, though, so
it's a difficult place to be.
It is a difficult place to be, yeah. And the thing is, to be honest, I feel like if I was T1, the organization, based off of some of these previous results that previous T1 rosters have had, it's honestly an improvement coming through, because a lot of these T1s were getting knocked out in 5th, 6th position. So to actually be a genuine 3rd place and have a shot to go up against a lot of these other, teams, like they'll probably be playing against Nigma. They're the team that gets the most views globally in Dota. So I think as T1, you're going to be ecstatic about that. Having said that, I think they were in a really good position to potentially take it into being in that group stage of the major, qualifying in 2nd place. But Boom and TNC, they're no slouch teams either. So to be able to eke them out, staple yourself there in the major itself, and more importantly, I think you still get 200 DPC points, for coming in 3rd. So that's honestly going to go a big way, because at the major, yes, there's a whole lot more points to go around, but it's only for the top 8. So you've got another 10 teams that are going to be attending the major that just don't get anything. And I forget how many, maybe it's 8 or 12 that Valve are just going to invite to TI based off of their DPC points, but 200 is putting you in pretty decent stead at this stage.
Certainly not bad. I think the more team that might be accused of significantly underperforming and failing is TNC, who you went into briefly just a couple of minutes ago. They're a team that I think a lot of people who have only watched Southeast Asia casually for the past couple of years would have expected to be towards the top here, and they've come in 4th, so not even making the wildcard positions. What you spoke a little bit about what went wrong for TNC this week, but across the whole tournament, what would you feel were the areas of underperformance for them?
I mean, you could excuse them for losing to Fnatic, because again, they're a very good team. They qualified first. You could excuse them to playing against Neon and losing because, again, they were on a hot streak. But it goes all the way back to that first week where they lost against Execration, one of the teams that barely was able to squeak through. I mean, they just qualified by beating out 496 this week. And that was, again, with a few stand-ins. So there's been a lot of roster instability. So to lose against that team, and not just to lose against them 2-0 in the first week of the season, just put them kind of on the back foot. It felt like TNC were perhaps a little bit slow to adapt to the meta that came out with this patch. We saw them picking up things like the Slardust, which I feel is a dead hero this patch, just because the things that it counters, heavy push, a lot of the cores that it used to be really good against, the Faceless Void, the Spectre, they're not in the meta as much anymore. So it just felt like perhaps they were a little bit slow. They got caught out. They were on the back foot. And you're always going to find it hard to qualify when you're only playing against a lot of these teams once. I'm keen to see in Season 2 of the DPC if Valve do try and change things up at all, whether that be number of DPC spots given to each region or number of games played. I'm not sure, but we'll have to wait and see.
You mentioned Execration there as the team that beat TNC in the first week and ended up staying up as a result of their results this week, in which they beat 496 2-1. Talk me through that series. What ended up happening there?
I think, they had Nando standing in for them, and if you've watched, honestly, even international Dota, he's been a reasonable mainstay of the Southeast Asian scene for a long time, and they kind of pulled him in as their ringer, if you're using an American term, a pinch hitter. Basically just said, look, we need to win this series. It hasn't been working so much with Ken thus far. And they bring him in, put Yowie on the mid lane instead. Nando plays position 1, getting some pretty good results. And then again on 496, I'm not sure what it is, why they need to consistently change around these players, but it was 458 playing instead of DatBB this time. Last series, it was Bombi taking a back seat. So is it something like, okay, well, I'm really good against, like, do they have a 6-man roster? Is it a thing where it's like, okay, well, I'm really good against these heroes that these guys like to play, so let me stand in for this one? Who knows? It could just be some roster instability there, but I'm disappointed that 496 weren't able to get there. It's always good to see the lesser represented countries be part of the DPC. We've got a lot of Filipino teams. You've got a lot of Filipino players just scattered amongst these teams. And Execration are going to ensure that at least 5 of them are going to be staying up in that upper division. But we got to say goodbye to our Vietnamese players going down to lower division, but they're being joined in the upper division by a full Mongolian stack in Lilgun. They did it. They were able to beat Yangon Galacticos and secure actually first place in that lower division. So congrats to them.
Yes, I was going to go into the lower division there. I don't think we need to talk about the entirety of what ended up happening in that lower division, but for the 2 teams we've got promoted here, which is Lilgun and Omega Esports, they're going to be in the upper division next season. What can fans expect to see from them?
Well, what I was watching just before we filmed this was, some European Dota, some liquid Dota, where you just see Koikfa cheesing every single game, and you're going to see a lot of the same from Lilgun. Teams of having to pick against a Huskar, Lycan, Broodmother, Lone Druid every single game, and you can't get rid of all of them. So one of them is absolutely going to get through every single time, and it just feels like they give that to 1, 2, 3, and I think honestly, for me, the real star of that team is Sanctity. I want to see him more playing against these higher tier opponents, because I feel like he's a potential breakout star to come through from this lower division, which is honestly what I was really excited with when Valve announced this whole system altogether. Across the board, even from lower divisions in NA, even there's a couple of players that have really stood out to me, but. We're talking C here, and Sanctity for me is the one. Hishki as well, a little bit, but Sanctity for sure.
It's interesting to see what happens with these kind of breakout all single nationality roster teams, because you can see breakout players in them, but often if you look, for example, in South America, Beast Coast are an all single nationality team who none of them speak any language other than their native language. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with these players from Lilgun, if any of them are able to join other teams, or if this team is going to stick together and become a real force.
True. Maybe start learning some English lessons. Who knows if they haven't already? But it does tend to be the common language, of course, within the Southeast Asian region. I want to see how the team does. I want another motivate trust situation where the team splits apart, and what makes them special is just dispersed throughout. But the teams that were picked up by these upper division ones in Fnatic being able to take Masaros for their off lane, and T1 they took Jackie for their carry. They're both still in the running for the major, and some of the ones that have gone on the wayside, Q, Boombell, and Fearless, they were in the lower division. Team Hoyo, unfortunately, which 2 of those players are on, they're out of the lower division. So it always is sad to see, some players who are putting through some really good results in the past little while, just not in the DPC, or at very minimum, they have to go through the qualifiers again to be able to get in.
It's interesting to hear. Let's close up then with some, I suppose, final thoughts on this season, first season of the Southeast Asian DPC. I guess the first question is, has it turned out within the realms of what you expected, if you think back on those initial predictions that you made?
I'm pretty happy with my predictions. I feel like I said there's going to be a top 5. I feel like Neon was one that people were kind of sleeping on a little bit. So they're the ones that I'm really cheering for. Of course, I'm going to cheer for any Southeast Asian team at the major, but Neon are my boys. They play this unique style, this really aggressive style. Yopaj is a star. I really like the versatility that Skem provides, and Natsumi, I'm not sure why they'll ever let him go. And yeah, a little disappointed that my prediction to stay up in 496 isn't there anymore, but it's just more opportunities, I suppose, for these lesser representative players to really appreciate their time in the upper division. And hopefully we can see some evolution come from Execration, because I felt like my one criticism for them was it's all one note. So they've got time.
Are there any surprises that you had from the style of play, or the way that the Southeast Asian Dota ended up looking, or was it all within your kind of wheelhouse of expectations?
I feel like Boom were not as aggressive as the Boom that I remember. Perhaps that could be due to when they were playing that style, it was very much with Dreamer Cell. They switched him out for Drew, and then they have to switch that out again for Savage. Drew, he just plays this kind of mid-game orientation style, but it's never this hyper carry either that's able to completely carry through a game. 23 Savage is that style, so you don't see that same level of aggression super early on. So I did like that they had this personality to them, Boom, where that was their key style, but they just had it polished up to a level beyond everyone else. But it feels like Neon have kind of taken the reins of being the kings of that within Southeast Asia.
Okay, we can look forward to seeing more of that at the major then. Just as I guess a final point and a final thought, Southeast Asia is one of the only regions that is fully of its geography within. Every single player is Southeast Asian within the region. And I think in a couple of regions like Europe and China, the only players who are not within that region are Southeast Asian players who are imported. Do you think this points to a kind of a growth in Southeast Asian talent that we can look forward to seeing more of, or is it just the sheer number of players?
I think so. You have people. You mentioned Europe. We've got Mid1 and players of that nature there. You got talk about China. You've got Ex Nova. Nothing to say. Great players coming through there. So I think the thing for Southeast Asia has always been it's just this hotbed of fantastically mechanically skilled players. It's just about finding the right environment to mold them into successful team players in a professional environment. And for a lot of these Southeast Asian players, they come from slightly lesser economically developed backgrounds. So to give them any sort of opportunity and potentially pay them well above what they might be used to, they're going to jump at that. Dota is a serious potential career pathway for a lot of these players, and I'm happy to see it continue. Don't take too many of our players, though. Other regions. We got to stay strong.
Good, great, good to hear. We'll leave it there then. Thanks so much for joining me across this whole season, and I'll see you soon. Thanks to Danog for taking us through Southeast Asia. Danog can, of course, be found on Twitter at Danog, and he is a great analyst, and I'm very pleased to have got him to cover Southeast Asia this past DPC season. We, however, are going to be moving on straight away to Europe, where T-Governor is going to take us through proceedings there. Okay, so just to kick off, let's start by talking about how we got to those tiebreakers that we had at the end of EU. So I suppose the Liquid Alliance and the OG and the Secret matches, what ended up happening there?
So, of course, in the final week 6, you pretty much had Liquid Alliance playing to decide who didn't have to play tiebreakers, basically, trying to kind of get that top spot. Alliance came out on top. They got that 2-1. They showed how Alchemist in the offlane can be devastating. Also with a different hero, they had a PA with the carry using that Axe. It was very fun to watch. And then because of that, it basically forced this massive tiebreak situation because Alliance 2-1 Liquid and then OG, a valiant effort. They had a really good game too, putting some new heroes into play, but they didn't really have enough to properly beat Secret like no team could this season. So yeah, Liquid lost to Alliance, OG lost to Secret, and we had 3 teams sitting at 3 and 4. Therefore, the great tiebreaker Sunday occurred.
Let's talk a little bit about Alliance then, because this has been pretty much a great series for them, coming in at second place. I think against Liquid, they looked really, really good at times. How do you feel the team has kind of come together across this past couple of weeks?
I think you have to think about week 1, and they lost Enigma, and it was like, okay, so you can respect them losing to arguably what was one of the top 4 teams in EU at the time, and you're like, okay, maybe they're looking pretty shaky. At best, they're a 5th, 6th position team. But then after that first week, they just consistently just didn't drop, not series, they just kept winning. And it's like, okay, they beat OG, then they beat High Coast, sure. And then it's like, okay, who else? Tundra. And it's like, oh, okay, at this point, they're now looking like they're a top 4 team suddenly. And of course, they did fall to Secret eventually. But it's the fact that each week, they were able to consistently just kind of evolve as a team and just look stronger and stronger, developing their own identity. Like, they're the ones that really pushed the idea of like Lion Tide offlane duo. They really like picking like Kotl Lion, support duo, like somewhat unconventional. And that alone allowed them to have a little bit more confidence going into most of these series. And even against in the Secret series, I think it was they lost 2-1. Like, they even were able to take a game of Secret. Secret only lost 3 games in the entire DPC. So that alone is like testament to Alliance, showing that they developed so quickly. It's like you can respect that their only losses were the first week of the entire season and then to Secret. So yeah, for sure, Alliance, they're one of the few teams that properly developed their own identity across DPC and fully deserved that second place in the group.
And this series, how have they ended up? Because I imagine at the beginning of the first couple of episodes of this, we spoke a lot about how they're kind of a Nico baby team. They're a team that feels a little not in balance in terms of the quality of their players, but in terms of the emphasis they place on those players. It felt against Liquid that they were somewhat more balanced, I would say. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. I think the support duo really kind of just stood up in this tournament, I feel. They were just making so many plays for the team, and often it was the supports make play, Nika Baby gets all the farm, they win off Nika Baby. And then like S4's left on his own, Limp does pretty well but falls off. But like this time, everything just went like positive. You know, supports made plays, S4 had a good lane. Nika Baby found farm and he scaled into the game. Limp never really fell off. And suddenly now, all the issues that Alliance normally faced, they weren't occurring. Everyone was like naturally having a upwards trajectory into the game. And like for most Alliance games, or especially last year, it was often like supports would fall off. S4 wouldn't even have a game. And then Nika Baby's the one who's like, come on guys, we're going to get there, you know? So like it is so refreshing to see Alliance just have all of their kind of components of their team correctly push into the game and be able to just play that. And even if the game gets pretty close, they just have this resilience and just kind of fight in them to be able to take it to them. Like the final game against Liquid, you're playing up against one of Liquid's most annoying drafts, but sure, Liquid did have some mechanical issues, you know, using Requiem or using Meteor Hammer on some S and White heroes, but it was still kind of testament for Alliance showing that over the 6 weeks, they became so cohesive, and that alone is very scary. They were at boot camp, to be fair, but at least half of these European teams were at boot camp, so we can't really use that against them.
Fair enough. Let's talk a little bit about OG then, because in that secret match, they, as you said, they came very close and then went into the tiebreakers there where they lost to Liquid twice and beat Tundra twice to fail to get through. This will be, I think, for a lot of people, a big disappointment for OG, who are seen as probably the second best team in the region. I think that's what you predicted coming in. What ended up happening across this final week for them? What went wrong?
Yeah, so coming into the season, of course, you have to put OG within your top three for any kind of prediction, because they always seem to have a strong identity of the patch, and they always have like their OG take on. For this DPC season, they just lacked that kind of identity where they're kind of like trying out a lot of things. They went through a big phase of trying out Puck when it became a big thing, varying success. They had a great couple Morphling series that then got banned for the entire season. They then suddenly, you know, realized that Alk was pretty good. And it's like, it never felt like OG had come into the tournament going, this is our broken combo, this is our style, play like us or lose to us, you know? Like that's what happens at TI. That's what happens at tournaments that they win. They just lacked that kind of unique take on the game that we all love to see. And because of that, they just kind of stumbled their way through the group stage, unable to really get that rhythm flowing to get that kind of top 4 placement. They came pretty close, but again, it's like OG, you would expect them to always be top 4, but hopefully they can kind of find some identity into the second season, because you don't want to see the same result where it's just underwhelming. I think OG always brings fun Dota, but again, they didn't bring it, so for sure they don't deserve being top 4, but yeah, like you expect them to.
Can we pinpoint those Liquid losses as OG failings? Because I thought Liquid looked really, really good in those series, and I was very pleased for them because they're obviously a team I like. But did they benefit off an OG stumble there, or were they playing out their minds?
Yes. I'm going to quickly answer you there and say, I think Liquid played out of their mind. They were goddamn amazing, especially game 2. Their draft was insane, but also was of a product where OG, again, don't want to bash on them too much. Again, they're a pretty good team, but when they were second pick on pick 24, the final pick in the entire draft, they would often like look to Thompson and go, hey, bud, what are you thinking like playing? And he would just like look over, stare at, you know, no tail in the eyes and be like, give me, and then he'd insert any hero. And then they're just like, bam, okay, we've got it. We picked it. All right, we're going. And this is kind of what happened where OG picked Arc Warden and they just kind of gave away a very quick loss. The quickest loss OG's ever had in their career, 30 minutes, 44 seconds. But flip side, yeah, Liquid, they played really, really well. And you could see, especially after the OG series, the type of kind of momentum that gave them, and they just looked very, very strong. Even though they fell to Alliance the week after, again, they're losing to, you know, now arguably top 2 teams in Europe. So I think, yeah, OG just wasn't really there. And Liquid, they found their kind of true form at the end of the season. Like in all Liquid fashion, right? It's the the second half of a tournament is when they really kind of kick it up. You know, the lower bracket, the backs against the wall, Liquid shows up, and they were able to beat OG, nearly beat Alliance, crush the tiebreakers.
The first of those OG tiebreaker games with Liquid was what I would describe as a cheesy draft from Liquid, which they're probably the cheesiest team in EU. I don't think that would be a controversial statement.
No, it wouldn't.
Do you feel they perhaps over rely on that? Is that an issue for them long term?
Not really. I think it helps them in best of ones, and they become like the best of one kings because they have this kind of hero pool depth. I think the shortcomings of Liquid is often they have two styles, which is really strong laning setups within the draft, or they have this like cute flex to then unlock the hero pools that you just mentioned. And in these tiebreakers, they started with like cute flex, they won, and then the second round of tiebreakers, when they needed to actually win them to get to the major, they then went back to the old style of just get strong lanes and then we'll just last pick a good hero rather than going surprise voice spirits, suddenly 4 or carry. And that alone just put Liquid on another level because you weren't playing these little mind games anymore. You're just like, oh my God, how do we deal with the Mars lane? How do we deal with the Weaver lane? It wasn't like, okay, so if they go here or there, and that's where I think Liquid, if they can continue developing these strategies where they don't rely on kind of the cuteness of a draft, then they for sure, they'd be a very scary team going into the major.
The last team from that best of that 3-team tiebreak we've not mentioned yet is Team Tundra, who beat Liquid once and lost to Liquid once and lost to OG twice. So not the best showing from them from there, but I thought across those games they looked pretty good. Would they be disappointed of a 6th place finish, do you think, or is that a reasonable placing for them?
I think Tundra was always destined to be 5th, 6th. I think for this group stage, it was always going to be, in my opinion, it was like the Viking, the High Coast were the bottom two, where the Viking could potentially upset 6th, of which Tundra was that 6th position team. And I think Tundra, they had the capabilities to maybe kind of have a little surprise run to kind of eking out a 4th or 5th. But again, like this group stage was so close where we had 3 teams tie breaks for 3-4 just for 4th place. Like anyone could have taken it within that group. And like even Viking, for example, they finished 2 and 5. If they hadn't dropped a series, like that single series where they lost to, for example, High Coast, they'd have been in the same tiebreakers. We could have even been talking about OG getting eliminated here or Liquid getting eliminated. But yeah, like Europe is super, super close in that skill. And for sure, I think Tundra, they should be happy with 6th just because, again, you're not eliminated. You can go back. They're technically a stack where they had 3 players of Mud Golems plus 2 new lads building it. So the fact they're able to even to stay in upper division, that's testament to themselves. They should be happy, but they could have easily made at least 1 or 2 better spots. And after the tiebreakers, they did show that they weren't strong enough right now in terms of depth of draft to really get it into the major. They were very good mechanically and in the game, but again, I think the drafts and how they got to that end point is kind of the issue from pushing them into being like a top 4 contender reliably.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about the teams coming up into the upper division for next series, which is Brame and your team, Hellbear Smashers. I want to go into Brame briefly. They topped the league, but I think it could be said that they were a little lucky in terms of the teams that they lost to getting disqualified. Were you impressed with what you saw with Brame? Is the general feeling that they got lucky, or do you think they are a strong team who deserve to be in the upper division?
I think out of all the lower division teams, I think Smashers and Brame are for sure the top 2. I think Brame really showcased that they have a good understanding of their own style, and that alone is much better than like other teams, right? So I think for sure, I think these are the top 2 teams that we should get. There is actually a best of 1 being played on today, the 1st, to secure who actually got 1st and 2nd place because they didn't play that out in the tiebreakers. The admins kind of cancelled the tiebreakers too early. So we are actually going to be seeing like who's like 1st place between the 2 teams. But yeah, I think unfortunately for Creekwave, they didn't really show enough identity to deserve going to upper division. Like they have good mechanical players, but like their drafts were a little bit samey, a bit lackluster. And they, after like the first couple of weeks where they kind of surprised everyone, was like, look at our team. They kind of, putting it bluntly, I think they spent too much time on social media and yapping than like actually getting better at the game. But I think the lads are very good at the game. Like I think next season they easily should be top 2 in lower division, and they should easily be like contending for upper division going into the 3rd season. But yeah, they're a scary group of players. They just need to spend a couple more weeks or months, just kind of fine tuning what they want to really bring to the game, and then they should be a forever a strong contender of this kind of upper to lower kind of transition team, like Smashers, Brame, Viking, High Coast, Creep Wave. They're all the teams that will be kind of constantly floating between the two divisions, most likely, unless one of them really has like a triumphant eureka moment to push themselves deeper into the upper division.
And your team, Hellbear Smashers, how have you felt this first one's gone? Because I going in, I think a lot of people expected you guys to probably even 7-0 these groups. You 6-1 to these groups, which is certainly not a bad result. Do you feel that was an easy run for you, or has it been at times a struggle?
We're a new stack, right? So compared to most of these teams, like Brame's been together for a long time, Spider Pig's been together for a long time, Hippo, like all these teams have had a pretty decent time together. Only like Smashers, Creep Wave, and maybe Bojui, I think, are the three to kind of stack. So personally for us, I think we're always happy being able to get to the upper division. Like that was our goal. We weren't ever expecting it to be just a clean 7-0. We knew there'd be always like a bad week coming, and that did hit when we played against Brame. But again, Brame, they are arguably, again, they're top 2 team, right, for a reason. So we don't really mind losing to them. We learned a lot about ourselves in that series. So yeah, we're just really relieved that as a stack, we're able to kind of find the rhythm quick enough to be able to actually contend for upper division. And now we have our true shot next season to rival these top teams and also, see what we can do. Maybe obviously the best goal will be don't come bottom 2. And then the best situation would be somehow get like a 4th place situation. But again, it's small steps. We have to be very realistic. It's, we're not going to be like screaming about getting to a major. We're going to be talking about, survive upper division, don't get kicked down straight away, keep learning, keep improving. And then maybe the time after we'll be looking at a little bit more.
Okay, we'll close up then. And in terms of the EU first, DPC, I think EU is probably the region that needed this the least. I think a lot of teams in EU are relatively high profile, and I think the other regions needed this as a boost to them, which EU didn't so much. I think it's still been very helpful for the region. But as a first season of the DPC, how do you think it's gone? Have there been surprises for you? Have there been ways that you'd like it to be different next time?
I think in general, after talking to a lot of players, just the length of DPC compared to the number of games you play is kind of disproportional. Like you shouldn't have to wait an entire week to play one best of 3, because like these teams, if they're at boot camp, if they're practicing, like they're forced into this routine of like high intensity prep for 2 months basically, only to play 7 best of 3s. And I think that's kind of, it's unfair to both the viewers and the players, where sure you might be getting 24-hour Dota, but you're not getting 24-hour Dota of the Dota you want to watch, right? Like if you're a European guy, you're going to want to watch your European Dota. So you're going to want to see 2 or 3 games of your team play, not just one series. Like no one wants to watch OGVC Group once. You want to watch it twice, for example. So I think either increasing the volume of games to 2 best of 2s compared to 1 best of 3 will be healthier, or at least shortening the league so the teams don't have so much pressure to perform for 1 best of 3 over like 2 months. It just feels unrealistic for what kind of the end goal is. So I think that's kind of the big thing. Allow some crossover between regions. Allow some European games to bleed into like the NA games, for example. Don't be so hard cut in having to always have a game going from a region. I think that's potentially will be a big detriment in the future.
Okay, great. Well, hopefully we'll get those improvements for the next one. But until then, thanks so much for joining me across this whole series. It's been a pleasure, and I'll speak to you soon.
See ya.
Thank you to T Governor for taking us through Europe. T Governor can of course be found on Twitter at T Governor. He's one of my favourite analysts, and it was great to watch him on screen doing EU and CIS for Dream League and ESL respectively. Also, before we close, I'd like to congratulate Brame and SSA Spartan, who you will have seen in a previous episode of this show, for making it to the upper division. He's a really nice guy, and I'm very excited for him. We, however, are going to be moving on straight away to CIS, where Mo Farah is going to take us through proceedings there. Okay, so just to kick off, talk me through, I suppose, just the final results of this week. What were the biggest games that we saw in this final week of the DPC?
I mean, the biggest game in theory was VP versus Na'Vi, which is the thing that we've been building up to the whole time in CS. Like, oh my god, they finally get to play each other in the last series of the DPC. VP just absolutely wiped the floor with them. It wasn't really that close, I don't think. I mean, Na'Vi had this strategy coming into the series. They played the Alk off lane in game 1, but they gave their Ags to the Slark. And I always feel like the Ags, this off lane Alk, you have to have the right core hero to give the Ags to. And I feel like Slark, his Ags doesn't really give him like this damage output that other heroes do, like the Monkey King, the Jug, the Gyro. Like when they get their Ags, you feel like they're doing a lot more in the fights in terms of their damage output, whereas Slark's just the mobility with the extra pounce and the cast range. So it didn't really work out for them in the end. I mean, the Slark was really hard to kill for ages, but it didn't really matter.
It's not very useful being hard to kill if you can't kill anyone.
Exactly. I mean, they could kill the supports, but they couldn't really deal with the cores. So eventually VP just took over the game. They won a Roche fight, and that was that. So, but yeah, it's interesting because VP beat Na'Vi 2-0. They've only dropped one game over the whole group stage. They've won every series and they dropped one game. And just for future reference, it was against Team Spirit as well, which is interesting. AS Monaco, Gambit, Extremum were both 3-3 at the start of the week. Monaco Gambit looked the much better team of the two. They come through, they win the series 2-0. It was pretty clean. They look good. Ever since no one's joined the team, we've talked about this. They took a game off Na'Vi. They lost their first series with him, but ever since then, they've looked fantastic. So I won't spoil the later results for that yet. But
Extremium aren't a team that we've really talked about much across this series. I think they've kind of always been a foil to other teams. We've often used them as context but let's give them their due. They lost 2-0 against AS Monaco Gambit. Is that a disappointing result for them? What positives can they take from this DPC season?
Conversation last week that they only beat the teams that finished below them. And if you want to be able to push on as a team, you have to be able to break into that upper echelon almost of your region, which it feels like they haven't done yet. I mean, they've played relatively okay. I mean, they've been that middle of the pack team in the group, which is exactly where they finished. I don't think anybody would argue against that, considering how they've played. But they have definitely performed better than I thought they would. Because they started the group stage really rough against Team Spirit, and they lost their first series 2-0. They came back and beat Unique 2-1. But yeah, against these other teams that on paper are better than them, they've just not really performed to the same standard. So I hope they stick together and carry on moving forward. I think G's looks really good. He's been pushing for this these weird 5 heroes, I say weird, like Death Prophet and things a lot. So yeah, hopefully we get to see more of them next season. But I don't really see them being better than the teams that have finished above them this season. Yeah. I don't see them doing it next season either.
Would you expect to see any changes from them, or it's difficult to know with these middle teams what they can do to improve? Because ultimately it's just slightly improve in every position.
Because if you can slightly improve in every position, what you're trying to do is take the players of the teams above you, which isn't going to happen. Unless they feel like there's certain players that they can find from teams around them in the upper division or that have played really well in the lower division that maybe didn't get promoted, then I don't know what upgrades there are to be had. You kind of have to, now that there's this league system, you have to focus on yourself almost and try and get better as a team, I think, which is kind of a nice change. We haven't really had that much before.
It's interesting to hear. Let's go into then the games that led us to those tie breaks. The Team Spirit versus Unique game, and we'll talk about Unique. Unique, I think we expected them to do possibly a little bit better than they ended up doing, but they did. It's full 2-0 to Team Spirit here and then beat Empire 2-1. How would you rate this as a final week for them?
I mean, they'll be happy that they've managed to keep their position in the upper division. I mean, that's the biggest thing for them. I mean, taking a game off Team Spirit, I think is good for them. They got close, but they didn't quite manage it against Team Spirit, so they did have to go to those tiebreakers. I think Empire will be bitterly disappointed. They looked pretty poor. They started the group stage okay, I thought. They came in, they looked all right. I was like, yeah, there's good hope for this. I know Kyle started talking about them as dark horses, which is how I felt at the start of the group stage, as possibly being a team that could push through. But they never really lived up to that potential, I think. And they looked like they fell a little bit flat at times. So I don't think... I mean, they 100% deserve to be going down in comparison to the performances around them. That's for sure. I mean, No Techies was the only team that finished below them, and they were really poor. So I hope to see more from them, because at the start of the season, I was saying that I like this Gwynblade guy. I think he his mid's really exciting to watch. Whether it does well or not all the time is different, but I think he's an exciting player. Interested to see if they make any changes as well, or if any of their players get picked up to go to other teams, because I think they have had good moments, just not fantastic games all the time.
Let's go into then that final game for the final slot in the major and the wild card, which was AS Monaco Gambit versus Team Spirit. I'm aware that Team Spirit have made a lot of improvements recently due to their new 4-position Miroslav, and they had to go back to so bad this week due to the rules. What ended up happening there was it just that they lacked that bit of quality because they had a player who didn't want to play with them and they didn't want to play with him?
I want to talk about Spirit first because we've talked about this like stand-in, like they effectively replaced Sobad with Miroslav before. They lost 2 of the games that they lost were against Empire and No Techies, which are the 2 teams that got relegated from the upper division. And this was just before they replaced Sobad. So ever since then, they've been playing really well. They've managed to beat Navi. They took a game off VP, like we said before, the only team to be able to do that, to take a game off VP, and the series was really close. But yeah, then it comes to the tiebreakers. They've used their 4 stand-in slots already, and they have to ask Sobad to come back to the team again. And we were talking about this just before, that it can't be a good situation for the team or Sobad either. Because if you're Sobad, you get kicked from this team, and then they're like, oh, can you come and play for us in tiebreakers? We need you to come back because you are a registered player. If I was Sobad, I'd be like, why do I want to do this? Why would I put myself through this again? Obviously, I mean, he's probably done it because of, he understands what the situation is, but it's such a weird scenario. But, if Spirit hadn't made the change as soon as they did, then they probably wouldn't have made the tiebreakers anyway, because they looked like they were performing so bad with him before. That wasn't even meant to be a pun, but...
I think that's what he intended when he named himself that.
True, yeah. But I think AS Monaco Gambit were the much better team of the 2 across both games. Game 1 was really close. It was really tight. Game 2, it felt like a little bit towards Team Spirit all the time. But then in Game 3, AS Monaco Gambit crushed them. No one played really well on his Storm Spirit in Game 3. They did this like Weaver IO that we've been seeing more and more across all regions. I know like Europe were picking it quite a lot as well. And they went for this Weaver IO and they just tore them apart. Team Spirit never really looked like they were going to win in Game 3, which is a shame. And like we said before, the fact that they've managed to beat Navi, but also lose to Empire and No Techie sums up their season a lot, really, because they've just been so up and down. It's been really difficult to see them when they first started the league and they lost to No Spirit and Techies. No Techies and Empire. I was like, oh, I mean, their season's probably done then, right?
Yeah,
but it's a shame after seeing them build up again to then just fall flat on their face because they have to ask Sobad to come back. I'm not saying that's the only reason, but it is what it is.
They beat them before when they were live to win. They beat them 2-1 with Miroslav. That does feel somewhat in contention for that.
But the rules are the rules. I don't necessarily agree with them, but the rules are there for a reason. You have to come into this DPC with the lineup that you want to play with. You shouldn't be able to make changes necessarily halfway through as a stand-in when you're actually just replacing them. So in the end, I mean, I'd rather see AS Monaco Gambit play in the tiebreakers anyway. I think in the wild card, at the major. I think no one's looked really good with that squad. It'll be interesting to see how they do. Can they beat the likes of the China and the Europe teams? Probably not. I mean, but hopefully they can give themselves a good push. And at least try and stay with that roster, I think, for the second season, maybe. But it's so weird with Ramses being a free agent and stuff as well. Could he potentially come in and sneak a spot from anybody in any of the teams? Hard to say, but yeah.
We'll see. I want to close up by, I guess, summarising a little bit about VP as a team. They're the only team across all regions who have ended completely unbeaten. Obviously, they lost a single game, which is incredibly impressive. Are they a team, do you think, that are going to be a serious threat in the major?
Yeah. And it's funny because CIS isn't watched by the same amount of people like EU and NA. It's a good region, but the EU language watchers don't give it the same amount of respect, I think. And people, when VP were playing against the EU teams in the COVID the COVID tournaments, when it was like all locked regions and things, people realized how good VP were because they were getting to finals, they were winning tournaments and things. And I almost think people have forgotten how good they will be because they've been stuck in their region that some people haven't been watching. And everybody that hasn't been will be sleeping on VP a lot. But everybody that has watched them will understand how good they are. You know, this team, they would have been really disappointed if they didn't come top of their group. We talked about it at the start when we started doing this whole show, that if VP didn't win every series, they would be disappointed. Because if you want to be the best of the best, you want to be the best internationally, you should be crushing every one of these teams in your region. And they did. So I'd really like to see them do well. I think they will. But, you know, who does best on the day in Singapore? You know, there's so many good teams out there. It'll be interesting to see because we haven't seen any international competition in so long. I'm really looking forward to it.
It'd be difficult for you to know this, I think, but as they're such a young team, there might be a degree to which they might struggle on LAN. A lot of teams have done very well in online tournaments and necessarily not had the mental fortitude to go through in LANs. Is there any telltale signs in their play that you can look at to understand how well they deal with the pressure?
I think they look confident, which is always a good thing. You know, they don't look like they have any doubt in themselves, which is really important. But that's where the support structure from VP will come in and it will help them, having these people around them that have been there before. With the old VPs, you know, we've seen VPs win major after major, you know, not so well at TI. But if they can keep this support structure together to help these players, like you say, they are young. So they do have that potential that maybe if they lose a game that they shouldn't lose, it might start to, you know, get to them a little bit. But I like to think that, you know, they've played the top teams before. This isn't, you know, like Neon have been doing really well in SEA, for example. These guys don't have the same level of like international competition, whereas they're playing against the really big teams. I feel like VP have done that when they've been playing against the big EU teams before. So I think that experience in itself should help them when they come up at the major.
Let's talk a little bit about the lower division and the two teams that we're going to see rising up. Just PuckChamp and Winstrike. Obviously, everyone is going to be very surprised not to see Hellraisers and Resolution and Lil and Vanscore not making it. But what can we expect to see from Winstrike and PuckChamp in the next series?
These teams that are going up, I don't see them as teams that can push into the top four again. Like I kind of see them on a similar level to the teams that were already in the upper division in that area. I mean, Hellraisers, you talked about them. They had that one really bad week where they lost 2-0 to Gambit and Winstrike, and they won every other series. So I don't know whether they were just having a bad week or something, but you can't, when there's so little amount of Dota being played, you know, every single series matters so much when you're looking for this promotion. Like if you lose more than one series, the chances of you going up are so, you know, like almost in other people's hands, or it's going to tiebreakers. So I don't think they can have any quarrels about it. But yeah, PuckChamp and Winstrike, I think, yeah, I don't see them pushing forward like much. It's a similar thing. But it's always nice to see new blood come up against new blood. Like the CIS region is not full of a huge amount of new blood until recently, but it'd be interesting to see how they do at least, because you know the second time round it's coming up for you know TI and things. So these teams now that they've been promoted from the lower division will be thinking, you know, we've got to go at trying to make the last major to then look towards TI, which is always the big goal for every single team. Bait watch as well.
Always important to know what's going on.
I thought I'd bring it up before you ask. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they looked so poor again against Winstrike. I'm not awful, but I mean, again, they can have no quarrels either about going down. They've not looked great. And I don't know do you know what the rules are into whether they can compete to lower division again?
I would assume they would have to be not allowed to, but we'll see.
Because I don't know whether they can go in open qualifiers again or not, or what. But yeah, we'll see.
Dendy can wear a moustache, be like, "Hello, it's me, Dondai."
And there can be a new Twitch emote for it instead. So like we all put a mustache on Dendy instead of the Dendy face. It'll be fine. The Dondo face.
We'll see. Any just before we close up, are there any closing thoughts for the whole of the CIS DPC? Because this is a relatively new region for you to cover in this amount of depth. What are there things that you've learned, kind of overarching themes that you'd like to highlight?
Overarching themes. I mean, there's been a lot of Disruptor, which I find really interesting. Because they like their aggressive play styles, of course. But a lot of these top teams, when they came against each other, Like when it was like Na'Vi Gambit or Gambit versus Spirit in the tiebreakers of things, it was quite a slow game. Like they were afraid of making mistakes almost, and it worries me a little bit that if you want to go and compete internationally, in these really tight series, you are always going to be more careful, of course. But felt like none of them, apart from VP, and sometimes like most of the time Na'Vi, like really went and tried to grab the game by the scruff of the neck. So. I'm looking forward to seeing how Spirit and Monaco Gambit do next season, because I think Team Spirit especially have built up really well, and they'll be looking to next season going, we've shown what we can do in most of this. Now we've changed our roster a little bit. Let's push on and try and make the major next time.
Great. Okay, well, we'll look forward to that. Thanks so much for joining me across this whole series, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks.
Huge thanks to Mo Farah for taking us through CIS. A good analyst indeed, and he can be followed on Twitter at MoFarahDota, and you should follow him there indeed. We are going to be moving on straight away to NA, where Neff is going to take us through proceedings there. Okay, so just to kick off, talk me through, I suppose before we get to the tiebreakers, the biggest series of this week.
Well, that is the story, isn't it? We need to talk about how we got into those tiebreakers in the first place, and that was Team Undying managing to take 2 games of the best-of-3 series against Quincy Crew on February 25th. We had a hell of a week. 4 Zoomers ended up taking a 2-0 against Sad Boy, so there was actually 2 tiebreakers in North America this week. This is why this is the best region, I got to tell you here.
Tiebreakers at the bottom and the top.
Yeah. Not something I think that EG or Quincy Crew were expecting for Undying to take a game off of them, and of course it being forced out, but made scheduling very difficult. But we're not here to talk about scheduling. We're here to talk about the details of these games.
Let's shake things up and go into Sad Boys versus 4 Zoomers first.
Yeah.
Sad Boys, I guess, would have been very, very disappointed to lose that game to 4 Zoomers. I think they probably think they're a better team. What ended up happening there?
4 Zoomers just turned out to be the better team. That's really all there is to say. I mean, they're nothing to scoff at. They managed to beat them in BTS Pro Series 4, which preceded the NA DPC. In the lower bracket finals, Thunder Predator ended up winning that whole tournament, unfortunately. But I think Sad Boys aren't really there yet. They haven't had that same amount of time as 4 Zoomers to mesh together, and their team play at times is a little bit lacking compared to the Zoomers, who have been the top dog after Quincy Crew.
I think PPD and Fear probably would have gone into this tournament expecting that they could have challenged for the major. I don't think PPD or Fear or Moo or Snaking, and maybe not D&M yet, are the type of people who would go into a tournament like this expecting to end up as relegation threatened. Do you think this team has a potential to take it further in Series 2?
I think they have the potential. I don't think that they were able to contest teams like Evil Geniuses or Quincy Crew, though. I don't think that Sad Boys ever had that potential. PPD is an amazing drafter. He's critically acclaimed as being like one of the best North American Dota 2 leaders. And of course, Fear is a living legend. Has been playing the game forever. But Quincy Crew and EG, Quincy Crew being the top North America, EG having like a team of world-class superstars behind them. And Undying, it felt like they tried to give so much this tournament. They gave it their all, trying to take games off of EG and Quincy Crew, and they impressed the hell out of everybody. But I think they finally burnt out at the end, and they just weren't able to keep up. But as far as the Sad Boys questions go, I don't think they should have been as low placed as they were. But Black and Yellow and A-Team just showed up on some days.
And let's go into briefly their tiebreakers as well. They managed to beat both Black and Yellow and A-Team in relatively short order. Were those as easy games as Liquipedia makes them look?
Yeah, those games were relatively one-sided. We saw the Sad Boys come out with a bit of a massive advantage over A-Team in the laning phase for that one. The Sad Boy versus A-Team game. Black and Yellow was a little bit back and forth, but we actually saw a Techies game there. That one also pretty one-sided. It was like I think 20K net worth lead at like 23 minutes into the game, so about as one-sided as Liquipedia made them out to be. Not a whole lot to talk about, but Black and Yellow gave everybody a hell of a show for the last match, if nothing else.
That's good to hear. Let's go then into the headline game of the week, which was, as you mentioned earlier, that Quincy Crew versus Undying series. I watched that one. I missed game 3, unfortunately. But Undying looked really, really good in there, and Quincy Crew looked a little, I guess, subdued. Would that be your analysis of what ended up happening?
I mean, Quincy Crew, they did manage to come in second overall, but they felt a little bit lackluster at times. There were little misplays that they made here and there. Sometimes it felt like a lack of coordination, not being able to quite cinch the game out. They didn't feel like they were in top form that day. I think they're a little bit stronger of a team than that. But, they managed to beat EG managed to beat Quincy Crew quite handily in the game. And I think a lot of that came down to how things were drafted. They had an Ursa, Yawar, on that hero, just getting kited around by a Venomancer. I'm sure everybody watching familiar with how that one goes a lot of the time. And they kept going on top of Quinn and shutting down his Ember Spirit, killing him again and again. So it feels like EG really did their research for this one and figured out how to shut them down and shut down Quinn's, amazing ability on these Spirit heroes.
They did. Obviously, they lost 2-1 to Undying, but they did end up beating Undying 1-0 to clinch the qualification for the major. Is it a case, do you think, of Quincy Crew kind of fluffing the end of this? Has this higher level of competition exposed weaknesses in their team that previously, in the period when they were very obviously the top dogs in the region, that we wouldn't have necessarily known about?
Mm-hmm. There were, it's hard to say. There were little misplays like by people overextending, going too far. They're getting heavily punished by Undying or not getting an ability or a dispel off on the side of Quincy Crew. And Undying punished all those little weaknesses, but they definitely looked weaker than Quincy Crew at the end of the day. Again, Undying, they fought like hell. They ended up having their backs against the wall, being behind 20,000 gold, but still not giving up and not giving Quincy Crew the chance to close that game out. And that's one of the reasons why I thought that Quincy Crew looked a little bit weak as well. It could be that they were nervous about the shot of not making it after being at the top of the region for better part of a year now. Losing your chance to go to the major at the last minute can be a little bit scary, I imagine.
If you were to, because they clearly have the ambition to be one of the top teams in the world, Quincy Crew, I don't think anyone could accuse them of lacking that vision of being a top team. If they were to make changes to their roster or the way they approach the games, what would you expect to see from them?
I think they fell back on Quinn's ability with Spirit heroes a little bit hard in their game against EG, and I guess I'd say they fell back on that one in their game against EG, and they seem to have figured that out on EG. Quinn is the tendency to extend very far forward and catch the enemies out. His team follows up, and sometimes he'll die for it, but in that particular game, he just ended up getting shut down again and again. So I think they need to change their strategy and not rely so heavily on him making so many things happen on those Spirit heroes. And especially once they start to get to the international level, when teams start really dissecting their play on Quincy Crew, it's going to be even more punishable.
I want to briefly go into the Undying EG series, because it felt like Undying could have won that game quite easily. They missed their timing. It felt there was that time when they missed a kill on RTZ because of the Dukes, and it felt like if they'd got that kill, they might have built some momentum off of the back of it. Do you feel that there's a slight lost opportunity for Team Undying in there, or do you think EG were always ahead?
That particular play where everything went wrong, you obviously saw that one as well. The RTZ juking them out, getting them to go on the wrong illusion on his Phantom Lancer after he got back up with the Aegis. That was the moment where everything fell apart for Undying. I think not only in that game, but in the best of three. They managed to turn that run around, get the Ravage off onto everybody, and it was just a complete disaster for their team. I think the game really could have gone differently at that point, but you're playing against a PL who is one of the better late game carries inside the game. And once he's slotted, it's difficult to take the game back. So that was the do or die moment. And unfortunately, they rolled the dice, tried to go for the right one, and they just got, partially outplayed, partially outgambled.
It felt like even after that, though, there was a timing they could have still hit. To me, it looked to me like if they were a more experienced team, they could have pressured and played around that timing of the Ursa BKB and the various other, I think there was another hero that could have got BKB around that time and took towers, but it felt like they got a bit winded by messing up and backed off a little bit. Is that something that as the team grows, you'd expect to see them take advantage of more?
As the team grows, yeah, I think that a little bit better at doing that. Another issue they had is that they weren't amazing at pushing down towers. They need to get people to get in front, and it becomes very easy for the EG to turn a fight around with a good initiation with Tidehunter and Earth Spirit. So once they're on the back foot, I think that a game was kind of unwinnable. It's very odd, but I would pinpoint that overall game, and I guess the overall day on that one misplay or that one roll of the dice there where they ended up just getting outplayed by Arteezy, which I'm sure is going to be everybody's favorite moment.
Let's close up our thoughts on the upper division then by talking a little bit about EG. They ended this week 4-0, 2 wins against 5-man Midas, which have hardly been surprising to anyone, and then wins in the tiebreakers that we just mentioned. I remember at the beginning of this, when we did our preview episode, you were a little bit down on EG as a team. Do you feel they've proved you wrong, or is it a case of a big fish in a small pond?
I think that they proved me wrong a little bit. I guess you could say big fish, small pond. Obviously, they have international talent on their team. They have a little bit more resources to work with, having an organization behind them versus everybody else just being a little bit independent. But they proved themselves for sure this season, ending up having a solid record and finally ending up at the top of NA after these tiebreakers. If anything, I think they should thank Quincy or thank Team Undying for giving them a ride into the playoffs. Quincy Crew's going to have to fight like hell, but I imagine they'll continue to prove themselves as they have in the past.
Sounds good. I think as well we need to give some level of props to Ice, who seems to have slotted into his new role incredibly well. I think a lot of people, because I heard a lot of whispers from Southeast Asia that certain people thought he was maybe a little bit past it at this stage and he wasn't necessarily the best pickup for EG, but I think he's very much proved all those.
I mean, there's targeted bans of that guy's like Nature's Prophet almost like so often. They have huge amounts of respect for him. They just have to play around Ice, but they just let Arteezy farm it. Which tells you a lot about what these other teams think of him.
Yeah, he's an incredible player, and I think he's very much proved it this season. Let's go into the lower division then, where we can see Simply Two Based, with the shouting at the end there, and the Cut have made the upper division. Simply Two Based are a team that I think many people were surprised to see in the lower division in the first place. How well do you think they can do next season in the upper division?
I think Simply Two Base will probably sit around the 5 and 6 position. I'd put them as a strong peer to Sad Boy. I think they could take games off of some of these better teams, but it would be quite difficult. Undying I'd value a little bit higher, but I would put Two Based ahead of a team 5-man Midas and maybe even Black and Yellow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's where I think it's Two Base hit, but that one was sorted in week number 4 after they finished their last matches. Then they took the default win against Jing, who dropped out of the lower division, the only team in North America that did. And it became a fight between Dogchamp, the Cut, and Arkosh for that second slot moving up in the upper division, which this week did end up being ultimately settled as the Cut managed to 2-0 Dogchamp, meaning no tiebreakers in the lower division for relegation to the upper. However, there was tiebreakers no tiebreakers at all in the lower division. It was the last relegation match between Byzantine Raiders and Electronic Boys. And Byzantine Raiders managed to get themselves a ringer in the form of Eternal Envy standing in for their team. But Electronic Boys managed to take the 2-0 against them regardless. Solid gameplay there by them.
Let's close up with then some final thoughts on the NA DPC this season altogether. As a league, how do you think it's been? Has it been very much along your lines of expectation? Are there things that particularly surprised you or knocked you off your feet?
A little bit disappointing to see one of the teams from North America drop out, but everything else, EG performing slightly above my expectations, but around where they should be, as far as everybody thought. I'm disappointed that Undying didn't make it to the major. Very solid team. Fun people to watch. I'm not sure if you catch any of those post-game interviews. I suggest you check them out. Mumiander is a very funny guy. But this is the perfect training ground for these North American teams. I can't wait till EG and Quincy Crew take number 1 and number 2 at the major respectively, as all North Americans deserve.
It's something like this league has been something that's been mentioned as a solution to NA's woes for quite some time. People in NA have wanted this a lot. I remember when I interviewed Moon Meander on Position 6, he spoke a lot about needing something like this to create an environment for him. Do you think it's turned out as NA people would have hoped? Or is there a sense of a missed opportunity, or will the scene continue to grow from here in your expectation?
I think it'll continue to grow. This is an excellent start. The teams being invited, the teams sitting inside the league, all of it was a little bit rough at first, as a bit of a trial run. But I think this is a great outline for letting people play Dota full time, giving people an opportunity to scrim against each other instead of having tons and tons of matches a week, having prep time against teams because the schedules are filled out weeks in advance. This is what the Dota scene has been needing for such a long time, and I am pretty grateful for Valve, as much crap as I give them on occasion, that they managed to put this together and that all these North American players finally have something to play in.
Great. Well, we look forward to seeing more of that next season, but until then we've got the major to come and a lot of exciting teams coming out of NA. Well, 2 exciting teams coming out of NA for that, which people can watch in the upcoming major. But until then, thanks so much for joining me across the season, Neff, and I'll speak to you soon. Huge thanks as always to Neff for taking us through North America. He's been fantastic this whole season, so thanks to him for appearing. He can be followed at Twitter at @NeffSensei, and you should, because he's good, although he does post too much about honeypop games. So be forewarned about that. We, however, are going to be moving on straight away to 1437, who is going to be taking us through South America. Okay, so just to kick off, talk me through what I suppose is the biggest match of this week in the region and the last week in the region, which is the SG versus Beast Coast match. Talk me through what ended up happening there.
Yeah, this was a very highly anticipated match because SG had to win the series to get into a tiebreaker to be able to go to the major. And Beast Coast, they were coming off a loss against No Ping. So we were not really sure what was going to happen. But once the draft started, we saw a very early pick, Kunkka, from Beast Coast. That's something that No Ping beat Beast Coast with 2 games in a row. And they picked him in the first phase, essentially. So just playing on stacks, farming with the Kunkka's high levels. And then the Kunkka would just go and make plays, make a lot of space for the carry. And it was just like 2 straight stomps, pretty much, against SG for Beast Coast.
So was it really Beast Coast just showing their superior drafting, their superior skill? Was there any hooks that particularly grabbed you in the series?
I think they played exactly the same way they played in all their other games, except they added Kunkka to their arsenal. Where I think that's what they pretty much picked up from No Ping. They're like, wow, this hero is like insanely strong. So I think we should use it for ourselves. And they did, and they did extremely well with it. So I think that's pretty much what they probably say, like why they lost to No Ping is just Kunkka.
Fair enough. Let's talk a little bit about where Beast Coast have ended up this time. They've reached the major playoffs. They've gone through without only that loss to No Ping to hold them back. Would you say that this was just a success story from Beast Coast? Are there any moments of concern?
I think just the No Ping series, pretty much when they actually lost, they did not lose a single game. He did not drop a single game until they played against No Ping, and where they just got too old. Maybe you can call it like a lousy day for them, but to be honest, after that, when they played against SG, we saw what their true potential was once again. And yeah, it was a pretty successful tournament for them. I mean, every game looked super easy, to be honest.
Beast Coast are a team that I imagine even before you, because SA is a region that's relatively new to you to cover in this detail, but Beast Coast would have been a team that you were aware of from seeing international, from multiple majors. Were there players or play styles that they brought out this tournament that were surprising to you?
Not at all. Like everything they've done now is exactly what they were before. They just adjusted the heroes according to what the patches, and also I think they learned a little bit more from like other international teams more than they learned from South American teams. But in terms of playstyle and individual playstyle of the players, it's literally the same.
Fair enough. So what do you think we can expect from them at the major? Is there going to be more of this? Because this is a region that they can dominate. Let's put it that way. They're the best team comfortably in the region. When we did the preview at the start, we felt that this is where they were going to end up. So they're able to dominate teams in this region. As they hit their major playoffs, that's going to be less easy for them because they'll be playing against much, much better teams. So what do you expect we can see them do when they hit the major, in your estimation?
So there's this strat they have where they do every game. They get this mid hero for Chris Luck, who has some kind of disable or can gank, and then they try to pick K1 a hero who has a stun, so that he will always TP Crystallock into the safe lane and kill the offlaner like multiple times over and over and over again. And that's not something every mid player does. Most mid players tend to rotate to the enemy safe lane and try to pressure the carry, but they do something a little bit different. And maybe the other teams, if they don't really pick up on that and they don't study Beast Coast, maybe they disrespect Beast Coast, they can definitely get punished by that, and that can give them a potential edge in the playoffs. So I expect some good results in the early stages from Beast Coast if they can do that
out a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Let's look into the other teams that played this week. We had Thunder Predator versus LATAM Defenders, which was a fairly easy 2-0 win from them. Is that very much as expected?
Oh yeah, definitely. That was no doubt. I mean, LATAM Defender was the worst team in Division 1. They will also be playing Division 2 next season. Thunder Predator was the second team who made to the major. They're going to be playing in not the playoff slot. They're going to be playing in the group stage. So that's going to be nice. And Thunder Predator, I think they're definitely worse than Beast Coast, but they have some cool ideas. They have very high individually skilled players, but their macro level of gameplay is not as good as some of the other tier 1 teams that we will see at the major.
They're also the team that we saw do relatively well when NA and SA was combined over the past couple of months. They started off this kind of season being almost quite disappointing. They lost a couple of early series, a lot of early games, and they've kind of pulled it back towards the end. Have they returned to the form that we saw them in across the last year, or are there still kind of a lot of wrinkles there?
I think the problem with Thunder Predator was Leo style for the most part in the first series, in the earlier series, and then he naturally, got back into shape, right, as the DPC went on, because it was like a month and a couple weeks. So they are getting better, but I still don't feel like Thunder Predator is a team that can match up against the tier 1 teams that well right now. Where like Beast Coast, I have confidence that this team is going to be taking off games, if not series, against some of the best teams in the world. But Thunder Predator, don't really have too much confidence in them in terms of like looking at all the other teams that are going to the major.
Are there particular weak points within that roster? Is it a kind of an average 6-7 out of 10 team, or are there positions they could replace to elevate themselves?
I think it's just more about the macro level of gameplay, just in terms of someone making the right calls in the game to put them in a winning position. They rely so much more on winning through lanes and their individual skills that they're not thinking about how to make the game easier for them as a group of 5. So that's going to hurt a lot when you get to the international stage, where you got all these best teams who play very well on the macro level, and that's what they tend to rely on, and that's why those teams are where they are.
They're quite a young team as well, Thunder Predator. They've got a couple of relatively younger players in that squad, and also they're all relatively inexperienced. A lot of them have played a lot across the SA region, but they've not necessarily had the international experience that, say, Beast Coast have got. Do you think that macro level will be massively helped by attending the major?
Oh, definitely. Every game, every series you play will help you learn the macro stuff and how important it is. But it just comes down to if there is a player or players on that team that respect that aspect of the game. Not every player respects that aspect of the game, especially a lot of the pub stompers. Pub stompers, they rely on their individual skills and how they dominate the enemy. They don't think about how they can help the team, how they can elevate the whole team into winning the game together. So if there are a couple of players on that team who can study well and can introduce those ideas maybe that they see from the international teams into their own teams, then we're going to see a lot of growth from Thunder Predator.
We've also, let's talk about the final game of this week, which was, it's the first game, but the final one we've yet to talk about was Team Infamous versus Ego Boys. What ended up happening in that series?
That series was kind of the series where whoever wins gets to pretty much stay in Division 1, and the loser will pretty much be relegated. So Infamous, they came out, they picked some good heroes. I don't really feel like Ego Boys had a lot of good ideas. Like they picked a Dusa middle one of the games, which is absolutely horrible. Like you never want to play Dusa mid. This is a meta where you pick space makers in the mid lane. heroes who can help the side lanes and elevate them, and they picked Medusa, so they automatically lost that game. Game 2, I think they were already checked out from game 1, and it was a lot better in game 2. They had a Morphling that was doing very well, but then Infamous, they just kind of outscaled them and just constantly kept running at them. Infamous simply a better team in that series, and now Eagle Boys end up going down to Division 2.
Infamous were also a team that we had not incredibly high hopes for at the beginning, but somewhat high hopes for them. What ended up, do you think, going wrong for them across this season?
I think a lot of people were actually expecting them to be like third, maybe even potentially make it to the major, but I think maybe they got a little ahead of themselves, perhaps a little too overconfident in their thoughts and their ideas. And sorry, that's my pet. I don't know if you can hear that.
Yes, I can. I was wondering what it was.
Yeah, it was. She's trying to go out, but yeah, I think they're just a little bit overconfident in themselves, maybe, and their ideas, and I think they just had to. Okay, just a moment.
You can let her.
Let me let her
out.
out. Yeah. Okay, she's okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
All right. Okay, back to Infamous. Yeah, I think they just kind of had to reset, figure out what the good things in the meta are and like what works for them, and try to use that to their advantage. I felt there was a lot of times where they were not playing like a team. I think this team probably had the most amount of promising like young players in their roster, like Angel, Mr. Jeans. I think Axel, their position 5, was an incredible support player, and I was very shook as well in terms of like their performance. So maybe a little bit of drafting stuff, and I feel like in season number 2, this team will come out a little bit better.
They've already, for season number 2, made an adjustment to the roster. They've dropped Mr. Jeans, which is a shame because he's got my favourite name in the DPC. And they're replacing him. I don't know with whom yet. They haven't announced that. But is it fair to scapegoat Mr. Jeans as a failure within that team, or can you just not know what the problems were?
I think it's not fair because he played well in a lot of the games. I know there are some games where he didn't do so well, but this is a patch where the mid laner matters a lot in terms of how they move around the map and what they do. Maybe in the team, they feel like he doesn't communicate that well with them, and that might be one of the reasons why they may have kicked him. I had no idea they actually kicked him. This is the first time I'm hearing this, so that's news to me right now. But yeah, like I think they should have just worked their things out instead of just trying to get someone else. Maybe their next player fits better with the team. Who knows?
Let's briefly delve then into the lower division where we've kind of ended up. We don't need to go too much into the matches. We had Infiz in the lower division. I've forgotten what they are. Infinity Esports beating Gorilla Pride 2-1. HKR beating Infamous 2-1, and then of course a forfeit from 0 to 900 because of the betting scandal. Where do you think this leaves us up in the lower division? Is it along the lines of what you expected?
So for me, in terms of lower division, it was actually much more entertaining as in the last days because there was a lot of tiebreakers that could have happened, and Infinity, Hokori, Incubus, they were all fighting for the 2 slots, and we had them play in best of ones. So this was like very important to these guys, especially these teams, especially the money that they can get from just being in Division 1. The guaranteed money is a big deal here in South America. So they were fighting for a lot there, and it was best of 1 games. Infinity Esports and Hokori both beat out Incubus, but those games were like really close, especially the first game with Incubus versus Hokori. I do feel like Incubus should have won that game, and I'm pretty sure right till now they're like beating themselves up over it. And then when they had to play Infinity right after their loss, I think they were kind of shook a bit, and their whole mentality was just completely off, and they ended up getting 3rd place. And I still believe that Incubus was the team that was supposed to be one of the top 2 and going on to the next stage. So now they're going to be stuck in Division 2 and not going to be able to make it. And that's a very heartbreaking situation, I think, for the Incubus team.
To close up, let's talk a little bit about the disqualification of 0 to 900. We don't need to go into necessarily the ethics of it, but they were a team that were in a relatively strong position from my memory.
They were.
Has that had a big effect on the division?
Definitely. I mean, inverse, they were surely going to be last place and out. They ended up getting 6 now, so they're going to be sticking around in Division 1. I think 0900, they would have been making a run for the top 2 slots as well, possibly being Division 1 next season. So it did make a big impact, and it just sucks for things like that to occur.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, hopefully we won't have any of that next season when everyone knows the rules. Let's close up then. There's nothing to talk about for next week because there is no next week. So I suppose I can just ask you just for some closing thoughts on the region. It's your first time covering it in this amount of depth. What's been your feeling about South America? Are there any summarizing thoughts you'd like to give?
Right. I've been playing competitively in every single region but South America. So I felt like when I was going into this, I didn't really know what I was going to do and what I was getting into. But once I've been there, every day working with the guys, you got Gareth, you got Zayori, Trent, and Bowie, and OGA Dota Pit. Like, these guys are amazing. I love working with them, so they made it easier for me. I learned a lot along the way, and I think South America is a very underrated region. There's a lot of cool games that occur here, especially with all the mistakes between the teams, make for some very entertaining games. I really enjoyed my time. I think especially because of the people that I've been working with, there was never like a boring day for me. So considering like it wasn't my first choice to do South America, I definitely was surprised, and I very much enjoyed my time, and I think the fans, especially who do watch it, are incredibly nice.
That's good to hear. I did actually want to ask you a closing question about the region. This is the first time we've seen South America just be South Americans. Normally it's kind of a region that's known for occasional European or North American influxes of players looking for an easier ride. And I know the region's grown a lot because of that influx in a way. Now it's just standing by itself. Do you think it's looking as strong as that potential allows?
I think having players come in from other regions kind of helps the region as well, because you get ideas and you can maybe even like band together and like try to beat these guys. So that also elevates them, but in the sense that you got all these teams and fighting for one another, there's a lot of pride involved. So these guys, like, they're gonna train, they really want to be the number one. So I think it's great for these guys, and it creates for a lot of good storylines, which I think is a great part of Dota 2.
Okay, great. We'll leave it there on that final thought then. So thanks so much for joining me across this season, and I'll hopefully speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Huge thanks as always to 1437 for taking us through South America. He is a fantastic analyst and also the only proper pro player we've got, and his analysis has been incredibly helpful throughout this whole series. He can be followed on Twitter at 1437x, and you should follow him there, of course. We, however, are going to be moving away to our final region and the still ongoing China, where Kips is going to be taking us through proceedings there. Okay, so just to kick off, talk me through what I suppose is the biggest match of this week in the China DPC, IG versus PSG LGD. What ended up happening there?
Yeah, so this was a big one, right? LGD has been floundering, underperforming compared to what people really expected from them. And then IG has, I expected them to do decently, but maybe not this good. And this was one of those real tests like, all right, is IG really top dog? And as it turns out, they are. But they aren't doing it flawlessly, and that's what makes them such an interesting team to me. I noticed at the start of the season that IG was still a bit wobbly. Sometimes if emo failed, Fly wouldn't exactly been able to carry the game. And that happened still in one of these games where we had an emo Zeus. Now, you've heard me talk about emo before, and he's a very technical player, right? He likes his spirit heroes. He likes things that he can make plays on. As it turns out, he doesn't actually adjust his map positioning to the hero that he's playing. So this Zeus was really far forward rather a lot. And that didn't really work out for them.
So was that in their game they lost?
They lost, yeah. That's the first map. And you'd think, all right, well, it seems IG is still wobbly, right? And then they go on and win the rest of the series. And it's not that convincing if you look at, for example, the kill scores or the way that they team fight. They have some bad goes. I also think, by the way, that over on LGD, Jinkyu played like an absolute beast. This was a losing series for him, and he was hitting all arrows on Mirana. He was stealing everything on Rubik. It was absolutely amazing performance for him. But as it turns out, what IG does, even if they lose these fights or barely get out with their cores, they play the map way, way better than LGD. So even as LGD was winning some skirmishes, was taking some fights here and there, they were still getting outfarmed. The gold difference just didn't budge. And in the end, every time as it came towards the late game and IG was still a little bit in the lead, they only had to win one fight to completely take over the map from LGD. And that is, in the end, very dominant play. Even if on the individual front, they made some misplays, they made some weird goes. But in the end, for me, as like a map play lover, it was absolutely delicious to watch.
Would you say that style of winning is quite typical of IG? Is that a game that they won in that style and that's unusual of how they normally win? Or looking back at, now you've come to something of this realization, looking back at their previous series, is the pattern there?
Yeah, I definitely think so. If I look back, it's like, oh, that's what they were doing. Because I was still not entirely convinced of, well, the chemistry between those two cores, which I've told before, Fly and Emo sometimes. I mean, I think Fly has also definitely improved. Sometimes if Emo drops the ball, Fly is just standing right there behind him going like, I got this, bro. Which is also something that he didn't always do previously. But also, yeah, if I look back now, their economy has always been pretty great throughout this season. So I'm personally very excited to finally have had that click in my head when I saw them go up against LGD and getting outplayed personally and still winning the match.
They certainly have their quite typical picks, IG. Whenever I look at an IG draft, it's always kind of got that Phoenix in it. They love that Phoenix. They're playing that quite a lot.
Absolutely.
JT plays a lot on the Mars, for example. Are they a team that you worry could get found out if they're relying on these particular picks, or do you think their base of heroes is large enough?
I think their base of heroes is large enough, as well as it's hard to outplay a team that's just more efficient than you on the map. So even if they don't quite get the picks that they want, even in that Zeus game where I think Emo was not quite in the right position, he was still often the only one who got caught out while the rest of his team was farming. In general, you'll always see IG spread out more and being more efficient with who goes where. And I do think that that's a skill that's independent of hero picks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go into PSG LGD briefly. As you mentioned, they've been massively underperforming this. They came in, they were our pick to finish top of the region. I think most people would have said that PSG LGD are effectively going to walk this. They're now 2-3. They've played some of their easiest series they've had to play, so their wins have come against LBZS and Magma. So not exactly incredible opposition to beat. What's going so wrong with them here?
What's going so wrong? I'm not really sure. I want to correct myself here, by the way. I was talking about a Rubik for Shinkyu. He actually didn't play at that series. I misremembered. But in general, I feel like their drafts have lacked some unity sometimes. It's hard to say. I think in general they make solid plays, but I feel like there's something about conviction lacking or something. I can't quite put my finger on the pulse either. It's a different problem to solve because they have this huge individual quality on their players, but I feel like maybe the chemistry is off, or maybe they don't quite know what they want to have in their style. And there's a lot more teams right now that are just way more convicted in the way that they play.
Mm-hmm. That's more data required then. We'll see how they look.
I'd say so.
In their match against eHome. Let's go on to Asta's week. They had a 2-0 victory against LBZS, which wouldn't have necessarily surprised anybody, and then took a 2-0 loss to Team Vici. What ended up happening in that game? Because that was the second, I suppose, big game of the week.
It was, yeah. And originally, if you asked me beforehand, I would have said, oh, that's a 2-0 Aster. Because Aster has a really strong lineup just overall, whereas Vici, well, everybody's been concerned about Erica. I've been concerned about Erica. But as it turns out, Vici have actually drafted for him really nicely after the break. The first game was a Medusa game versus a Monet Arc Warden. And I actually quite like the Medusa versus Arc Warden game because Medusa will always eventually get either a MKB or a Rapier. He eventually got the Rapier late. I would have personally really liked to see, extra credit points for just going Manta style into Rapier, the Miracle build. But as it turns out, if Erica is just allowed to first farm completely independently and then stand in the middle of the team fight without the need to make plays necessary, he does really well. He's still a farming monster. He still does his target selection right. He shouldn't be the guy going forward and starting the fights off, because I don't think he's quite experienced enough for that. But this Medusa worked out really well. There was a lot of delay from Aster, but as it turns out, if you let a Medusa farm, because you're trying to get your arc warden up, you still are going to have to deal with a monster of a snake lady later.
And then that second game, they played a Drow Shadow Fiend, which is... Drow seems relatively unusual for the Chinese region from what I've seen. Although maybe I'm completely talking...
It's basically only Erica that plays it right now, unless there's a Terrorblade. Everybody respects Drow as a Terrorblade counterpick. But Erica is really the only one who plays Drow in other situations. And previously I found his positioning kind of lacking on the hero, but this game, he was top of the board most of the time, kept his positioning right, even when in the mid-game his team actually came behind. And eventually, SF plus Drow just has so much punching power that they managed to just drag the game right on back, and Aster was 2-0'd. And I think that spells dire news for their ability to get to the top spot, because they were very close.
But they're still only 4-1. This is Aster. I mean, Aster have played some relatively easier teams, but they've still got a game against Magma to go, as well as that game against IG. Do you think they have it in them to... We know they have it in them to beat Magma. Do we think they have it in them to beat IG and take that top spot?
I think they do, but with the way that IG play right now, they're not my favorites. I think IG, with the way that they've handled their own problems throughout this season, for me, I think they deserve that top spot. But that match is going to be one to watch, for sure.
Great. Let's close up then by looking at eHome Elephant, in which Elephant finally managed to show some bigger signs of promise after their other wins and against PSG and LBZS, and beat eHome 2-0. What ended up happening there? Because eHome have been another big disappointment of this. They've really, really struggled. Is that
eHome have also struggled. Yeah, I think one of the things that's been disappointing for eHome is a lot of people expected big things out of XM, who is this, up-and-coming mid-star. And I do think his laning has looked really nice. But afterwards, he still doesn't quite know where to go. And then the Chalice and Fade offlane hasn't always delivered either, which means that in the end, you'd want to rely on Ajit as well. And Ajit is still more of a mid-player than a carry. So their puzzle pieces are still a little bit shaky. Whereas for Elephant, I think if you look just at the sheer player quality of these guys, then, yeah, they took a very... I don't want to say easy, but a very convincing win. First game, great Winter Wyvern play over from FY, who had a couple of really just game-determining, fight-saving Winter Curses. And of course, it always feels good to play something with such a reliable stun versus a Storm Spirit. And second game was an Alchemist win. Now, Alchemist has been getting banned everywhere, first phase sometimes, after NA started the whole thing. And NA was right, I can tell you that. Alchemist is crazy strong right now, but Eurus got an Alch and he completely walked away with that game.
Cool. Yes, I mean, hopefully China won't become so Alchemist dominated, but I can't see it not becoming its very Chinese pick.
It is a very Chinese pick.
Great, let's look ahead to what we can expect.
Can I do one more thing here? I'd like to interject with an upset that happened in the lower division, because... Right now, we haven't talked about the lower division very much, but I do want to bring up here that we've had an upset there after Chinese New Year, which is that Sparking Arrow Gaming, who are really just straight up top dog up until this point, very hard to beat, have taken a fall to DLG, which has a couple of my favorite up-and-coming players on it, specifically Device. Maybe you've heard me mention him. And I'm not saying that this is the same guy as the Counter-Strike player, but I am saying that nobody has seen them in the same room together.
Fair enough.
But we have some upsets in the lower division too, and it's a shame because DLG can't actually make it to the top anymore. But if anybody is interested in watching a series from the lower division and want some high-quality dotes, go check out the DLG versus SAG series that was played earlier, because that was a really nice match.
Very close in the lower division of 4 teams on 4-1. You'd expect any of those teams possibly to take it. It's going to be interesting to see what is happening going forwards. And talking of going forwards, let's look at what we can expect to see next week. In the Chinese Open division, we've got LBZS versus IG on March the 4th, which should be an easy IG win. On March 5th, we've got Asta versus Magma. And March 6th, Elephant versus Vici. And then closing off the week, eHome versus PSG LGD. So not an entirely bumper week, but the Elephant Vici series should certainly be an interesting one. Would that be your pick of the series for the week?
Yeah, absolutely. Just because of the way that it's going to work for the standings, it would put both of them at 4 and 2, right behind, of course, top dog IG. And I'd say that Elephant has a good chance of taking this once again on player quality. But if Vici manages to keep Erica in a position where he's really comfortable and he can just shine as like the proper hard carry, then Elephant might have the work cut out for them.
Well, we'll see. Looking forward to that on March the 6th, and also eHome PSG LGD is an interesting battle for the middle of the table, so watch out for that. But anyway, thanks so much for taking me through the results this week, Kips, and I'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Thank you to Kips for taking us through China. Kips can be found on Twitter at Kipsol and should be followed there because she is excellent. And also, China is going to be continuing past these weeks, of course, because of the break for Chinese New Year. So Kips is going to be returning for the next 2 weeks. We're going to be doing a slightly longer China-focused show. It's going to be Kips and one guest. The first guest for the first week is going to be Bcop, so I'm excited to have him. I think he knows a lot about the region, and I like him as a person, so it's always good to have him on board. It gets on well with Kips. So that's going to be next week, so watch out for that on the usual places. We, however, are going to be done with the DPC show in full now, so thanks to everyone who's watched all of the episodes. I do really appreciate all the support and the nice words you have. If in the conclusion of this series you have any comments or feedback you'd like to give me for the way I've produced this show, please reach out on Twitter or via email or even in the Position 6 Discord, which can, I think, be found in episode description. And just let me know anything you'd like to change, any feedback from me as a host, any feedback that's constructive and nice for the guests that I can pass on would always be helpful. We will be returning probably for a season 2 in much the same format, maybe some slight tweaks, so I would like to improve anything before that. I'll also probably be doing a shorter, more condensed show for people who have even less time to follow the DPC than this show allows, so look out for that. I'll also probably be doing a major preview as well for the major with the same analysts who've done the DPC show. Everyone said they're up for that, I think, so that should be exciting to watch out for. But until then, thanks so much for listening to this show. I've got Position 6 this week with DM from Team VP, the most senior player in the highest performing DPC squad, so that is definitely something to watch out for on this Thursday. But until then though, thanks so much for supporting me, and I'll see you soon.